Hey everybody, it's Christopher Small, the owner of CMS Law Firm. We do estate planning, we do probate, we do it well. Today, I want to talk about what a QTIP trust is and whether or not it can help reduce estate taxes, amongst other things. Before I get to that, though, I want to remind you, if you have questions about this or anything else related to estate planning or probate, and you want to talk with us over the phone for free, you can do so by going to cmslawfirm.com. Okay, so let me give you some background real quick about how this question came about. Then I'll talk to you about what a QTIP trust is and whether or not it can reduce your estate taxes. Okay, so I had a call from a potential client today who is married and he has kids from a prior relationship and she has kids from a prior relationship, and they are both bringing in property sort of into the relationship that they kind of want to keep separate, that they want to keep account of. It's not that they don't want to have the property or that property available, I guess, but they want to make sure that they are sort of preserving some assets for their kids, and they were wondering how to do that. And as we were talking, the topic of a QTIP trust came up, and the way that I would describe this is sort of like you can actually add in the credit shelter part, I think, if you really wanted to, kind of like a credit shelter trust without the credit shelter part. Okay, and essentially, so basically what a QTIP trust allows one to do, sort of a revocable living trust that you have that when you die reverts to an irrevocable trust. Within that irrevocable trust, the spouse is typically the beneficiary, not typically, is the beneficiary of that trust. And then when the surviving spouse dies, those assets go wherever the original creator of the trust has directed them to go. Okay, so bottom line is, it's a way to make some of your assets available to a spouse without giving them really any control over the downward distribution, and often any control over the specific distribution even to them. Often you will name a different person to be the trustee. You have specific language related to how the assets are to be distributed to the surviving spouse. And then when the surviving spouse dies, the remainder of those assets would go to the named beneficiaries, often the kids of the first spouse to die. Does that make sense? Now, hopefully it does. With regard to estate taxes, if you have just a QTIP trust, the answer is there may be some tax advantages if you do it right. Here's why. So no matter anything that's reserved with a QTIP trust, it typically qualifies for the marital exemption for estate taxes. Typically, this is U.S. spouse to U.S. spouse in particular. Some of these rules apply if you're not a U.S. spouse, but we're just going to do U.S. spouses right now. U.S. spouse to U.S. spouse, you can typically give as much of your assets as you want to your spouse without having to pay any estate taxes. If you basically note that you want to utilize the marital exemption. QTIP trust allows for this as well. So you can preserve these assets and allow your spouse to use them without having to pay any estate taxes at the death of the first spouse. That does not relieve you of your burden of paying taxes. It sort of just puts them on hold, okay? It extends the timeline for paying taxes. So what happens is any liability for taxes on those assets would be due after the death of the surviving spouse. Okay, so if the surviving spouse dies, then the QTIP trust is going to be responsible for paying any estate taxes that it is responsible for at that time. Okay, so the answer is not really when it comes to estate tax, except you get to defer those taxes for a while. So you can grow more assets, you can do those kinds of things, then you have to pay taxes at the end. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that is important to remember is you can, at least in Washington State, it's a little bit different. Actually, it's not. You can do it federally as well, I guess. But I don't know if you'd want to, because you can port your estate tax exemption. We're getting into the weeds here, but that's okay. From a Washington state perspective, because you have no portability with your estate tax exemption, you could essentially create a credit shelter trust out of it, carve out your estate tax exemption when the first spouse dies, reserve that for the kids, have the remainder available to the wife or the spouse, the husband, whoever's alive, in the form of a QTIP trust, where they could have access to those funds but not be able to direct the downward distribution or have control over how those funds are distributed. You have a separate trustee to do that. And then you get to have your cake and eat it too, which is to allow your spouse to have assets to live off of and to utilize, but to also preserve some of those assets for your children when your spouse is gone. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. To summarize very briefly, a QTIP trust is a specific type of trust where you allocate your assets as a deceased person to your surviving spouse, with the caveat or with the instruction that when the surviving spouse dies, those assets will go to some other beneficiary that you've named. Typically, your kids, and typically your kids that you probably have had from a prior relationship. It's typically what this looks like. When it comes to estate tax savings, a QTIP trust like that will defer your estate taxes at the death of the first spouse until the surviving spouse has died. That's when the estate tax will be owed. Okay. If you were in Washington State, you could tack on like a little credit shelter language, carve out your Washington State estate tax exemption, and still do the QTIP trust, and then preserve your Washington State estate tax exemption. Okay. Hopefully that made some sense. If it made no sense, that's okay. That's why I'm here. You can always have a conversation with me. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. If you have questions about this or anything else related to estate planning or probate, you can talk with us over the phone for free by going to cmslawfirm.com. Okay, as always, that's it for today. And as always, if you like this, please hit the like button. If you have a question or comment, please leave it. I'd be happy to answer it or respond to it. And that's it. So, as always, I'm Christopher Small. I am the owner of CMS Law Firm. We do estate planning, we do probate, we do it well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate you, and I will talk to you again soon. See ya.